The United States federal government should substantially increase its protection of water resources in the United States by amending the Clean Water Act definition of waters in the United States to the 2015 definition to allow for the protection of the United States wetlands, rivers, streams, and lakes.
Beautiful. All right.
See, I thought ours was long, but I went into open it. It's so easy.
Yeah, it's not.
Paragraph.
Yeah, seriously. I'd like to start off with topicality. My interpretation of substantial is substantial must be at least 50%. This is UNEP 2. Substantial increase means 50 to 100% change. Second, violation. Their plan increases protection less than 50%. Their plan only increases to groundwater, wastewater, and ditches from wetlands. This is less than a 50% increase from current wetlands. They currently have their 100% that they have right now, but they need to increase it by 50%, so they need to be solving for 150% more than what they're currently solving for. Then standards. The best definition of substantial this is the best definition of substantial as it is contextual and expert opinion and creates a bright line. Context. This card is in the context of natural ecosystems, which links directly to water pollution, especially wetlands. It's an expert opinion, the United Nations Environmental Program, the global authority that sets the environmental agenda. Then, it's also a bright line. This interpretation sets a clear line at 50%. Any increase 50% and above is substantial. Anything below 50% is not substantial, like their plan. Then, voter issues. Fairness. Topicality protects negative ground. Without this argument, the affirmative can run anything. A restrictive interpretation of substantial is the only check on topic explosion. A huge topic with tiny cases that avoid court arguments makes it impossible for the negative to compete. Then education. Topicality protects the educational value of debate. An affirmative plan that is not topical kills this educational value. By the affirmative running a micro-app, it limits the number of arguments that the negative team is able to run, as we have to have super specific links to link to their plan. Thank you. And the case file is misleading.
I got rid of it once I looked into it, but you had already done it, and I felt really bad. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't
It's fine.
do that. So it's kind of shady.
Wait.
Look, I'm looking for a certain card. Okay.
Chemicals from going into the river because it runs off from agriculture.
So you basically said that it must be okay.
Yeah, 50%.
Okay.
So I would define water resources as whatever.
First, Judge, I would like to go into their interpretation. We need it. There's 264,837 square miles of water in the U.S., including Alaska and Hawaii, from the USGS in 2010. There are 110 million acres of wetlands in the lower 48 states, no author 17. The total wetland acreage in the lower 48 states is estimated to have declined from more than 220 million acres 3 centuries ago to 110.1 million acres. Alaska alone has 174 million acres of wetlands below 09. About 43% of Alaska, or 174.7 million acres, is considered a wetland. The plan adds protection for 50% more of our nation's wetlands. And so that is 55 million acres protected. When converted into square miles, that is 886,000 square miles just in the lower 48 states. And when you consider Alaska, with 50% of 174.7 million, that is 87 million acres, or 136,000 square miles just in Alaska. This protects 51% of all water resources in the United States. Therefore, we meet their 50% is substantial interpretation, not even taking into account the lower 48 states, groundwater, and thermal streams. So many different things that our plan also protects. Just taking into account Alaska, it is substantial. Now, going into a counter definition, even if you don't believe we meet their definition, substantial means of a considerable amount, not some contrived percentage. Prost 4. Substantial means considerable. It does not imply a specific number or cutoff. Substantial in one situation may not be in another. Judge, when you think about a substantial amount, you think about a good amount of something, not some random percentage. Every context is different and unique. Therefore, a customary meaning is better, as calling 49% of all U.S. water insubstantial is simply illogical. The status quo removes protection for groundwater that the AF would protect. Scout Environmental 19. The proposal also clearly outlines that what would not be included in the waters of the United States, including groundwater. Nicole Hancock, no date. Half of the United States population relies on groundwater sources to provide drinking water. We meet this counter definition since a considerable amount of people, 50% of the U.S. population, uses groundwater for drinking water, and the affirmative would now protect that water, and the status quo simply would not. So even if you don't believe that the AF doesn't meet the next definition, the affirmative plan meets the counter definition. Now, going into the voters. The NEG has stated that it is uneducational. Debate is a learning curve. Every time we go to a tournament, every time we enter a round, we are hit with a case that we may have never gone against before. We are hit with an argument that we may have never encountered before. We have thrown into a situation, an environment that we've never seen before. We are forced to adapt. We are forced to go outside of the box of things that we know and we know how to do and try something new. Adaptation is a part of growth. We must try something new. We must adapt in order to further ourselves and keep moving forward in debate. We are learning more and more with each round, and whether we realize it or not, we just have to take that extra step and allow ourselves to grow. This is an educational experience. Now, they also said that topicality as a voting issue protects negative ground, but simply, what is a predictable case that is run in that is run. Our case, to an extent, is extremely predictable. It is a slight variation of one of the cases in the novice cases. In fact, it is most aligned with the novice WOTUS case. Any generic evidence works against us. Any generic state CP works against us. Any federalism DEA works against us. Every team that has gone negative against this case has fared just fine. No one has not been able to counter it with anything. Unfairness is not an issue in this round. Okay. So wait.
Yeah, and that's the point of topicality. You spent 4 times longer than I did, which isn't bad. But could you send me those that thing you just read?
I did.
No, the
Which one?
the voter issue response.
Sure.
I don't want them right now, but just like those were really good. And then for education, you said that we are educational.
Yeah.
New every.
There you go.
Where jurisdiction tribal, not federal government.
Okay.
You do have to isolate one specific term.
I'm happy.
Okay.
Could you pull up your definition of substantial?
But you gotta make the argument. You have to really find how it applies to that case. For instance, North, I know I laughed in our group about a specific interpretation.
Okay. You ready?
Because there is no good.
Yep.
Awesome. Starting now. I'd like to start off with topicality. First of all, they say that they meet our definition because there's a lot of acres and wetlands in Alaska. But these are the part that are already under the WOTUS rule. By changing the definition, it needs to be a 50% or more increase. It's not 50% of water, it's a 50% increase. So they may be protecting 50% of water, but that's not what the topicality debate is about. It needs to be 50% or more of an increase. And since they're not doing that, they don't meet. Then moving on to their violation. I already talked about that. Their plan doesn't meet the 50% increase because they're only like increasing it to like, groundwater, wastewater, ditches, and a couple of other things. And then moving on, they talked about our voters. They say that it's fair because that's a variation on the novice case list. But this is literally how untopical cases come about because they take the plan from the novice case list and change it to fit an untopical affirmative so they can win their own rounds. Then they said education, that we should be adapting and it's new every time, but that makes an unfair burden to the negative team because we have to prepare for an impossible number of asks, and the affirmative team has had months to prepare for this debate, and they know that they're running an untopical affirmative, and by doing this, they're removing Nate ground, it makes this debate very uneducational, as the Nate will be scrambling to come up with arguments that link to their case. Then, moving on to their counter definition and / our standards. Their counter definition was substantial is considerable and a considerable amount. This doesn't meet our standards, which went unrefuted by the affirmative team. Contextual, expert opinion, and bright line. There was no response to these, so these are the standards we will go by. Every definition provided in this round should be contextual, have an expert opinion, and be a bright line, which I already explained our definition is. But the definition for the negative, for the affirmative card, doesn't meet our standards, as it's about Venezuelan cement. It's not contextual to the resolution. It's not an expert opinion about water resources, and it also doesn't create a bright line at 50%. And another argument they made is that, once again, their definition is that substantially should be a considerable amount. They proceeded to use 50% of people use groundwater. If they don't like percentages, then you can ignore this fact. Even if you don't believe that even if you believe that you should see both of those, even if 50% of people use groundwater, it's not a 50% increase of all water resources. Because 1, they don't meet our interpretation. 2, the topicality argument is on fairness in education, and because their counter definition doesn't meet the standards provided at the beginning of this round that went unrefuted, their plan is not topical. Ugh, that was a terrible last 10 seconds. We're good.
If you have the same standards for each of them, but maybe the word two has a different, it is better for the conversation definition, whereas the current water resources that are in public, they don't have to have. So, the reason personal standards is to say, prefer our interpretation. That's it. If the other team doesn't offer an interpretation, then you understand it's yours for no reason. And that's fine. I'd rather read it for no reason than having it and not have read it. So the other team doesn't offer a counter interpretation, then why are we talking about standards? We all agree on the interpretation. Now the debate is, what do they mean that interpretation? You think that he said the narrative is fair because he's not running what he is observer is where, well, for all observers, especially they don't know the chart. So here you're explaining, here's why, if we went to tell the other language, it should result in a negative sign. Because the A part means that the judge is supposed to consider totality before they consider the merit for the claim. And that's the whole, in the real world, it would get thrown out of court. It would not be used. Now, obviously, we don't have a jurisdiction.
Okay, first I would like to go into the next definite interpretation that it needs a 150% increase. Currently, 50% of all wetlands are protected under the status quo. A 50% increase for wetlands would be in the plan, plus groundwater, plus 18% of rivers, and 20% of streams. There is no way that this does not meet their definition of 50% of a 50% increase from the status quo. The status quo is 50% of wetlands are protected. There are 50% more will be protected just in Alaska alone. Now, going into a few of their claims, they first said that their definition is a bright line and contextual. But again, as I've outlined, this bright line takes so many topical AFs and cuts them. What this does is if an AF protects 49% of all water in the United States, 49%, it somehow isn't topical. Even though it protects this much water, 49% of all U.S. water, somehow it isn't topical. Now going into a few of their claims, they claimed our card for the definition was talking about Venezuelan cement. But if you look into it, that is true. But if you look into it, it says the word substantial. It isn't talking about Venezuelan cement. It is talking about the word substantial means considerable. It's talking about the word, not Venezuelan cement. So therefore, it is valid. Now, going into a few of their voter issues, they said it removes negative ground. But as I've outlined, simply you can run many different things. They said now the neg has to scramble to find things to run. But our case has had many different things run against it. There are plenty of things to run against it. This is not an excuse for why this is removing neg ground. Again, as I've outlined, we meet their definition. And even if you don't believe we meet their definition, we meet our own definition. 50% of people rely on groundwater in the United States for their drinking water. Currently, that groundwater is not protected. We need to substantially increase this. This is 174 million acres. 50% of that is currently not protected under the status quo. Of course, we need this plan, and it is substantial. It's a substantial plan. It is a 50% of increase for all wetlands protected, 50% increase for all water resources protected under the United States, not even taking into account groundwater, lakes, and thermal streams. Simply, it is topical. It's substantial. There is no world in which this case is not substantial.
Okay, go ahead and start now. First of all, Judge, I want you to consider topicality first before you consider any other part of this affirmative, because this is the most important argument and the most important voting issue. First of all, they do not meet our definition of 50% increase. The plan does not create 150% increase. It may be protecting stuff now, but it does not protect 50% more of it. Then, for our standards, the only response to it was that Brightline is ridiculous and that it eliminates a lot of topical AFs. That's the point of a Brightline. It sets a line over 50 and below 50. And whichever side your affirmative plan is on is whether or not it's topical. Then, they also didn't respond to contextual, which is the biggest one. And even if you believe that expert opinion is not a great standard, then look to context. They don't believe Brightline is a great standard. Look at expert opinion and context. Expert opinion. You need an expert opinion for a definition because it needs to be in context of the resolution, and it needs to be in context of the resolution. Which, looking at their counter definition does not meet the standards. They say that it's not talking about Venezuelan cement, but if you read through it, it's talking about dumping grounds and how much dumping is substantial. And it literally does not mention environmental ecosystems, anything about that. It is purely about Venezuelan cement, which is why you should prefer the undisputed standards in the round, context and expert opinion. Then, once again, moving on to education, they say that there are plenty of things to run. Once again, no, that there's not. Their plan destroys negative ground. They took one of the plans from the novice case list and modified it so we could run less arguments against it, which is destroying our ground and making us scramble. Then moving on to fairness, they didn't really talk about this in their last speech. I'd just like to reiterate, fairness is what protects the neg ground. Without this argument, the affirmative can run anything. You need to vote on topicality and the strict interpretation of substantial to check on topic explosion. So, because their counter definition doesn't meet our standards, and because you should be considering topicality first before any other argument, you should be voting for negative because their plan is not topical. And thank you.
Okay.
And clearly they don't believe. And they're still trying to be tough. That's the United States of work on the issue. Because even not holding the future, we ran it later. They are being accused by being fined. Punish them with a ballot, vote. That's what the reverse voting issue of RBI would say, is that the C argument itself is the actual abuse. And because they have said that abuse to the others should lose, because there was for abuse, they should find their own standards. Come back and answer questions.
Keep taking prep.
Okay, it has been sent to the liaison. Limiting background is a thing. Okay, it wasn't my breath. If I was like, I have to use that debate. I meant that in terms of like, it's not a valid argument because in this case it does not make any sense. But yeah, limiting background is not
First, Judge, I would like to start off with the next claim that it has to be 150% increase. Again, let's just have an example. Say I have 2 cookies. One is taken away from me. Now I have 50% of the cookies I once had. If we have another cookie, that's 50% of an increase. That's 50% more wetlands being protected. Their card specifically states a 50% increase, not 150%. Now, going into a few things. Again, we proved that even just in Alaska, that is 50% of all water resources that are now going to be protected. Now, going into a few of their voter things, they said, again, this without topicality being a voting issue, that that debate will not be educational. Again, going into what I've said, debate is a learning curve. Every round you learn how to respond and how to find things. You hit an argument that you've never encountered before. It is a learning experience to do that, to have to respond to things you've never adapted before. Now, going into what they said about how our case is basically just taking a topical AF of the Novus WOTUS case and transforming it into a non-topical AF. Almost anything that you would run against the WOTUS Novus case, you can run against our case. It simply is not that different. It's just a different definition. Almost anything that you can run against their case, you can run against our case. Therefore, the negative ground and the negative scrambling argument simply isn't applicable, as it almost anything you can run against the Novus WOTUS case, you can run against our case. Now, again, just going into their bright line argument. As I've said, every situation is different. Every situation is unique, and they have claimed that our card, since it is about Venezuelan cement, isn't topical. But it is talking about Venezuelan cement, but in specifically the word substantial generally means considerable. It does not imply a specific number. They're talking about the word. If they were talking about Venezuelan cement, sure, you can say that. But they were talking about the word. They specifically said the word substantial. So, of course, they could say that if it was talking about Venezuelan cement, but it's not. It's talking about the word substantial itself. Therefore, again, as I said, when you think about substantial, you think about a considerable amount. You don't think about some contract percentage. Saying that 49% of all U.S. water resources is somehow not topical is simply illogical. It doesn't make sense because of these reasons, because we meet their definition, because we meet our own counter definition, and our counter definition simply is more applicable, and their definition takes many topical AFs and cuts them, even though they protect 49% of all water resources. I can only see that this argument is going to the app. I was gonna say I can only see an affirmative ballot.
Yeah, I was about to say.
This is not a